All right. Well, it looks like it is 12:30 here, so we'll go ahead and get going. To start off with, my name is Mathias Ingle, and I'm going to be doing the first portion of this talk this afternoon. And then we've got Stephanie McCauley, who's going to be doing the second half. So I'm going to be talking on vegetable gardening in a small world. So, get my clicker to work here. So, why do we want to grow vegetables? You know, maybe you think they taste better. Maybe you think they're fresher than the store-bought. Maybe it's a way for you to have some good exercise or mental therapy. Lord knows we all need some of that right now at times. And then it can be, maybe you think it's more nutritious. Maybe you want to maybe control the use of the pesticides that are on the plants, or maybe you want to raise some gardening that is free from pesticides. Maybe you want to have some fun. Maybe you like some harder to find crops, or you just like a good variety. Another thought is to maybe stretch your food budget. All these are the correct reasons to start gardening. So just a side note here, it may not always be the most economical to garden, but economics is not always the driving factor when starting a garden. So you may be asking yourself, you know, where can I locate this garden? You know, you want a place that's in full sun. You want a place that has some well-drained soil. You want to take a place that's away from the trees and shrubs, and also that's close to a source of water. There's no need to be lugging a bucket of water clear across the yard or to your garden if you don't have to. You also want it to be reasonably level, and you also want to try to avoid the lowland. The worst thing in the world is you work hard to put a garden out, and then all of a sudden a big rainstorm, very similar to what we had last year around this time, comes along, and then your garden's all
4 inches
flooded
in
out.
one block.
So what if I don't have enough space for a garden? Well, I'm going to go through a few techniques that you can use or even think about. So the first one is a small plot technique. You've got raised beds, container gardens, or even community gardens. And I'm going to dive into each one of these in particular. So your first one is small plot techniques. You want to plant these in wide bands rather than in rows, kind of along the square foot gardening method. You want to get as much into a small amount of area as what you can. Maybe you want to interplant fast and slow growing crops or do some companion planting. Maybe you think about dwarf varieties. You know, these are varieties of vegetables that are specifically bred to be smaller plants. Not necessarily smaller fruits, but smaller plants. Or you can replace some early crops with summer or fall crops. Kind of do a 2-in-1 type throughout the season. Just a couple notes here on companion planting. Companion planting is where plants influence one another. They can improve the health or the flavor of a companion. They may interfere with the growth of a neighbor, such as weeds. You can also use them to repel or trap an undesired critter, such as a pest. And you may also help attract a beneficial insect, such as bees. Cornell University has a publication there. There's the link to it if you want to write that down. That goes extensively into companion planting and what goes with and what does not go with each individual vegetable. Another idea is raised beds. You know, these are better for water drainage. There's less compaction because you're actually putting the soil in there, and they're earlier warming, and you can get into them a whole lot sooner when you plant. Easier access. You know, with raised beds, they're typically smaller, and you can get around them a lot easier. And typically there's no garden tiller or anything like that. It's all hand tools usually. And then if you're in a poorer soil type area, you can control the soil that's in there. You know, around where we're at, we've got some pretty good clay areas, and sometimes in the right spots, they may not always be the best. So if you have a spot like that in your yard and you want to put a garden there, you can control what type of soil is in there. When thinking about raised bed materials, there is several you can use. You can use wood, plastic, galvanized metal, or concrete blocks. Each picture there is kind of a representation of each one there. A special note on wood, you want some wood that is naturally rot resistant, such as cedar or redwood, but those two options are typically your most expensive. If you use a treated lumber, use arsenic-free treatments. And the arsenic has been kind of phased out for consumer use, but if you're still concerned, if you got some lumber laying around or you just want to use, your neighbor's got some wood, just line it with plastic, and then you know that a lot of those contaminants aren't going to get in there into your soil and into the vegetables.
Hey, Mathias.
Next one, yes.
Sorry, this is Corey. We had our first question in the chat box. I just wanted to make everybody aware that this will be recorded. So I know that slides might be going by fast, so you might not have time to write down links, but this will be recorded and put on YouTube, and then we can send that out to you as needed. So I'm sure Mathias wouldn't mind a little slower for people, but first question. Someone asked if they should plant a cover crop in a raised bed in the fall.
That is certainly something you can do. You know, it's in my opinion, it's going to boil down to personal opinion and what you're really trying to do. If you're worried about that soil kind of being a little windblown and kind of blown away or washed away in certain areas, you know, a cover crop is going to help keep it there when it's supposed to. So good question. Okay, any others real quick before we get going again?
So somebody was asking, where do we search on YouTube to find this video? I believe it's under Purdue Extension Gray County, but we can get you more details on that. And I know that several of the other county offices will be posting them on their YouTube channels as well. But send one of us an email and we can get those to you.
Okay. All right, well, we'll continue on here with container gardening. Container gardening is for people who love to garden, but generally lack the space to do so. You can use a container garden to expand your garden space to a patio, balcony, deck, porch, or windowsill. With these, it's easier to control the soil in them and have it more, you can control the soil better for the desired crop, such as blueberries. I know blueberries tend to like a little more acidic soil, and so in the ground around here where I'm at, which is east of Kokomo here, our ground is not suited for blueberries. But in a container type situation, we can amend those soils to make it work. It also can make gardening accessible, and because they look marvelous. So what kind of containers can you use? Well, it's only limited by your imagination. You know, I've seen old wheelbarrows turned on their side for gardening, just some plastic pots or rubber pots or clay pots or just anything. As it says there in the slide, anything can be used, such as like a tub, crates, old whiskey barrels, tires, cinder blocks. I mean, it's only limited by your imagination. When using a container, you want to make sure you have adequate drainage. One of the best things to do is to make sure that if it's a closed container that'll hold water, you want to drill some holes in there to let that water get away. Yes, you're going to have to water it quite a bit more, but you don't want that water to be standing there at all times to help increase the chances for root rot and some of the other diseases that could be there. So, or you could use the double pot method, which is kind of a pot inside of a pot, which allows that water to get away. With compact plants, you want to look for descriptive words such as compact, bush, dwarf, or patio. Just because the name baby or mini is in the title does not necessarily mean that it's a dwarf plant. One particular one that seems to be pretty popular is tomatoes. Tomatoes generally have a height between 2 and 4.5 feet, and that's the actual plant size. Off on the right-hand side there in the table is quite a few varieties of the dwarf and mini varieties of tomatoes. Some of them can actually be grown in like a 5-gallon container or even straw bales. The fourth one I kind of want to go over is community gardening. And community garden is sharing. It's sharing of your space, your resources, your knowledge, and your harvest. One particular community garden I wanted to highlight in this presentation is the Howard County Master Gardener Community Garden. Our Master Gardeners here in Howard County have about an acre plot in coordination with Purdue Extension and Ivy Tech to grow produce for several non-for-profit charities in the area. And in the past 13 years, they have donated almost 260,000 pounds of food over in that time frame. In 2019 alone, they produced 15,856 pounds of produce in probably one of the worst growing seasons that I can remember. So with that, you've in their community garden, you've got some cool season crops. So many of these can be planted soon, as soon as the dry is drowned enough to work. You want these to be planted before Mother's Day, typically. Refer to HO 186, Indiana Vegetable Planting Calendar for dates to make sure that you're planting in the correct time frame. So some examples of cool season crops, you've got your broccoli, your Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, lettuce, peas, potatoes, radish, and spinach. Your warm season crops, you want to plant into the ground typically after Mother's Day. Here in Howard County, which is kind of north central Indiana, we're looking at a May 1st through May 5th. That is typically when the last frost comes in our area. On this map here, at least in Indiana, you can see kind of what your last frost dates would mean. So like Noble County or Kendallville area, you're looking at a May 6th through the 10th. Or if you're down in Posey County, all the way down in the bottom left-hand corner, you're looking at probably an April 6th through the 10th, according to this map. So some examples of your warm season crops are beans, cucumbers, eggplants, melons, okra, peppers, pumpkins, tomatoes, squash, sweet corn, and sweet potatoes. There are some crops that are tolerant to both cool and warm season. Those are typically your beets, your carrots, your onions, and your Swiss chard. So I'm going to turn the floor over, or the mic over, to Stephanie here, and she's going to talk about transplanting some of these crops into your garden.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Stephanie McCulley, and I am the A&R educator for Grant County. So I'm going to follow up Mathias's container gardening talk with a little transplanting 101. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Mathias, sorry. Bear with us, Mathias is running the screen for me. So why transplant instead of putting seeds right into your garden? So transplanting is a pretty important practice because that means that your plants have been given the upper hand of growing strong in a perfect and warm environment. When you plant seeds outside, you can't always control these variables. So you're able to control the light, the soil temperature, making sure they get enough water, and you're eliminating that competition of other weeds when you're putting them in the seed starting trays. When should you transplant? The best time to typically transplant vegetables, like Mathias showed you on that map, is gonna be, oh, accidentally turned my video off, is going to be mid-May, early May, depending on what kind of vegetables you're putting in the ground and whether they're cool season or warm season. So for example, if you're going to transplant cucumbers, since those are more of a little bit of a warm season, you're going to go a little more towards middle of May, maybe even into June, depending on when you get those seeds started. On a non-vegetable topic, when you're transplanting bushes or different plants such as trees and stuff, you're going to look at a fall time frame, because that's going to give everything a lot more time to establish itself in the soil before it gets cold and give it a head start for spring. So getting your seedlings in the ground after they have a couple sets of true leaves, and making sure they're full and healthy looking, but you don't want to let them be in the seed trays too long, because then their roots can run out of room and they get root bound, and that can cause a lot of stress, and they can eventually die from that. So kind of finding that sweet spot of making sure that they're big enough, but not too big. So now that we have kind of talked about the when and the why of transplanting, I want to talk a little bit about the tips and tricks and the how-tos. So there's 3 big things that you kind of think about when you're getting ready to transplant, and that has a lot to do with planning. So planning ahead, you want to prepare your garden and prepare your plants so that they are healthy enough and strong enough to survive the transplant, so they don't get transplant shock and die. And then lastly, you want to we'll go through kind of like how-tos of transplanting in that process. So planning ahead. From the moment you start your seeds, you need to have an idea of how long they're going to take to germinate and if they're a warm or cool season crop. So by checking the planting calendar that Mathias mentioned, you're going to be able to see that spring frost date, and that is a great date to kind of guide on when you need to start your seeds or when you're going to put them in the ground. So if you're starting seeds indoors, you're going to use that frost date, and it's going to be anywhere from 3 to almost 8 weeks of when you need to be planting ahead of that in your seed starting trays indoors, so that they get big and healthy enough to be ready to transplant outside right after that frost date. And on the seed packets, it'll kind of tell you how many weeks you want to start before that frost date. So knowing the conditions that your plants best grow in, some plants like peas and spinach that are cool season crops need to be planted before the outdoor temperatures get too warm, but other plants like tomatoes and peppers that are warm season crops, you're going to want to make sure that soil temperature is pretty consistent, around 55, even 60 degrees would be ideal, just to make sure that they are ready to go. And even though that we have calendar dates, use your common sense. So keep an eye on your weather forecasts. I know we experienced a couple really low temperature dips over the last week or two. So just using your common sense that even though it's past the spring frost date, and even though the calendar may say go, use your common sense to make sure that you're not putting those plants out when you know it's going to get super cold. So preparing your garden and your plants. So when the weather looks like it's taking a turn for the better, you want to start getting your garden and plants ready. So the first thing you want to think about is working the soil in your yard. And I know you guys kind of asked some questions on cover crops, and cover crops are a great way to keep compaction down and making sure that soil is nice and loose for when you want to put stuff into it. But make sure you're checking with your local extension agent on what to put in, and like Austin mentioned in the comments, making sure that they're a winter kill so that they die on their own and you aren't having to use pesticides, which can in turn impact how your vegetables grow or not grow. So compaction can happen really easily just from foot traffic or equipment if you're mowing your lawn or doing anything like that, and just from sitting over the winter, especially heavier soils. So you may need to add some fresh soil on the top to help break everything up. And just remember, as Mathias mentioned, that you need to have good drainage even after you're taking your plants out of the containers and putting them into your real garden. Make sure you've got a good, well-draining area that you're placing them in. And secondly, before being planted into the garden, transplants need to be hardened off or toughened up a little bit. So about 2 weeks before you decide to transplant, set your seeds outdoors in a semi-shaded area just for a couple hours at a time, and gradually over those couple weeks just leave them out longer and longer, and then by the probably 3 or 4 days before you're going to put them in the ground, they should be out in their seed starting trays or containers full time. And also another thing about the hardening off period, make sure you're keeping them well watered, because being out in the breezy air and dry air can cause a lot of water loss, so you want to make sure they're well watered. So a little bit on transplanting how-tos. So now that your garden's ready and your seedlings are hardened off, it's time to plant. So the perfect transplanting weather is not always going to look exactly how you think it should. Overcast is usually the best time to do it, not super sunny, just because out in that hot sun can really be a little intense for plants. And so you want to make sure if it's not going to be an overcast day, try and transplant them early in the morning so that they have a little bit of time to adjust. So next, you're going to want to make sure that you soak the soil around the seedlings right after you transplant so the roots can settle in really well. And if it's a really dry season, you want to make sure you have a little mulch to put on there because that'll help retain some moisture in the soil for you. Thirdly, know your plant and know what you should be planting the depth at, or planting depth is. So watermelons, cantaloupe, zucchinis, cucumbers, things like that want to be planted deep enough so that the soil comes to the base of their roots. But tomatoes, peppers, eggplants want to be planted a little deeper so that you're almost covering those first true leaves. So just kind of know how deep you need to be planting your plants as well so that they get the best start outside. Another important thing is maybe thinking about adding a little bit of fertilizer to the root zone. So macronutrients and micronutrients are very important to help bring in hang on, I'm gonna make sure we're muted here. Macronutrients are really important in promoting strong root development, especially phosphorus. So you can swing by your local farm store and pick up a bag of 12-12-12, or they make a little bit higher concentrated on the phosphorus side of a 15-30-15. And so what you can do with these is just take a couple tablespoons, mix it in a gallon of water, and then after a couple days you've had your plants transplanted, take like half a cup or a cup and put it in each area where the seedlings are, because that'll help give them a little more nutrients to really keep their growth going well.
Steph?
And then, yes.
So we had a question in here. Marcia would like to know what mulch is best for vegetable containers.
Any mulch. I guess I have not seen anything, and maybe other people can chime in here. Mulch is mulch. I know compost, if you compost, can be good. That never hurts anything. So personally, we get black mulch every year for our landscaping, and so I mean I would use black mulch. So I don't think there's a true best kind, but just any mulch is going to help keep some moisture around.
And Stephanie, I will jump in. It's Amanda Baird, Tipton County. So mulch, as far as containers or raised beds, you're going to be wanting to look for those natural colors. So any dyed mulches, you know, some extension publications have just said maybe look away from those and just go with more of those natural wood-based.
Thank you, Amanda.
We have another one as well. As you were on fertilizer, she would like to know what the ration again is for fertilizer in water.
Oh, so if you just take a tablespoon or two of the fertilizer and dump it in a gallon of water and then mix it up and kind of make a liquid solution out of it, let that fertilizer dissolve in there, and then you can pour anywhere from half a cup or a whole cup of that solution and put it around the seedlings. And wait a day or two before you do that, just because you don't want to overexhaust the root system by transplanting and loading it down with nutrients on the same day.
Perfect. And last question before you move on, Mary Ellen would like, shouldn't tamp down new transplants, something she thought was important. What's your opinion on this practice?
So what are we meaning by tamp down? If she wants to type back, if she's pressing the soil around the transplant. So yeah, I would not suggest really firmly pressing soil. I mean, you want to fill the hole, but I would not press down and pack it in, if that's what you're asking. You definitely want to fill the hole back in and get dirt in there, but you don't want to really press it down and pack it in.
If I can jump in, this is Jeff from Wabash County. Whenever we transplant things, it's not so much a tamping down, but a gentle pinching. So don't smash it down around because those stems are so fragile, but just use your fingers to draw the soil up to the stem and do that as gently as possible. And then a gentle watering can usually fill in those empty spaces as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. So I think the last, a couple reminders. Oh, sorry. I want to make sure that Mathias had my screen up. Like I said, watch the forecast for those late spring frosts. And if there were to be something happen, make sure you've got some sheets or anything to cover up so that if you do get them transplanted and a week from now we have a cold snap again, you're prepared to cover them outside to take care of them. And always remember to handle with care. Like we kind of just talked about, be gentle with them while you're transplanting. Try not to smush the roots or cut the roots. I know depending on, because there's a couple ways you can look at transplanting, whether you started seeds or you're doing some kind of small container gardening and you're moving from a small container to an actual garden in your yard or a raised bed. Try not to use a trowel if you don't have to, and use your hands because your hands aren't sharp. You're not going to cut any roots, things like that. So just be careful when you're transplanting. And like I said, it never hurts to throw a little bit of compost or extra potting soil into the hole that you're putting in, just to make sure that that's got an optimum environment for those roots to settle in and be happy. So as Mathias and I talked through this, we mentioned quite a few different articles that are going to be good resources for you all, and we've listed them here, and I'm also going to be sending them out in an email as well as the link and stuff when I get all that put together. So be looking for this because all of these links will be sent to you. And as always, reach out to us or your local extension agent if you have questions on any of this. So that kind of concludes our program, and we will take any questions that you have. And I'm not really seeing any pop up. So I guess that means we covered everything pretty well.
I just wanted to remind everybody, don't forget that we will be sending out this presentation again. But also don't forget that Steph will be sending out the survey as well. If you could take that, that helps us out a lot.
I did see a question come up about the planting depths. So what you want to focus on for those, and you can look up this on extension publications, things like that for exact crops. But you want to make sure for the most part in general that you're going and planting right up to that, either the bottom of the first set of leaves, or some plants are going to want to go a little deeper like tomatoes and you want to cover that very first set of leaves. So you're almost putting that first true set of leaves in the ground under the soil. But like I said, each vegetable is going to vary. So you're going to want to do a little bit of research on that specific plant before you go transplanting. So
there's another question here. Anita wants to know what we recommend for buckwheat planting. I don't, that's something you want to take or another A&R would like to take.
I will open that up to another A&R because I'm not sure about buckwheat in gardens. Or flaxseed. I see that's a question too.
This is Amanda. So buckwheat is a summer cover crop. So my master gardeners, they would go in, they do some of those cool season crops. So maybe lettuces or beets. When they were done with that, they would then go in and seed the buckwheat. And buckwheat is great, but you have to be careful in your garden because if you let it go to seed, you'll continuously have buckwheat over and over again. And we will send out a link that talks about specific seeding rates for the different cover crops.
Thanks, Amanda. I have another one here. Janet would like to know, how do you use tree leaves as mulch?
I've always been told that you don't want to, you've got to be careful about it because you want a normal, natural amount to cover the ground. You don't want to pile them on. So that definitely works as a composting option. You can definitely do that, but don't necessarily make a huge pile. You want to have that natural ground cover as they would kind of almost fall off the tree a little bit.
To reiterate on that, or expound upon it, I agree, Steph. I think I see so many clients that have issues with trees or have disease or fungus in their trees, especially on the leaves. And the best practice to get rid of those is to, once the leaves fall, to remove the leaves and dispose of them some way. So if you're using leaves, especially from contaminated trees or diseased trees, you're just bringing that disease into your garden or into your new plant, which is not something you would want. So just be cautious and cognizant of that. Another question here from Julie. She wants to know, is it okay to tuck plastic bottles into the bottom of tall raised beds?
Say that, I'm sorry, say that one more time. You cut out a tiny bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Julie would like to know if it's okay to tuck plastic bottles in the bottom of tall raised beds.
What does she mean by tuck in there?
For what
Like-
purpose?
Yeah.
What are we, Julie, if you could expand on that just a little bit more for us so we understand what you're trying to do.
My interpretation is that they're utilizing them to fill the beds so they don't have to put as much soil in there, but also that would, I would assume, would help with drainage in the bed as well. So that's one thing that, that they may be utilizing the plastic bottles for.
Okay,
I
so
agree
she
with
did
you,
comment.
Austin.
Yeah, she did comment here, and it is kind of what Austin was saying down at the bottom, so she doesn't have to use as much soil. Yeah, that is something you probably could do. It's the best. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on if you're ever going to move it or not, I think. So if you're going to move it, and how hard it would be to clean up after you moved it. So, yeah, you probably could, but I don't know if I would recommend it or not.
So I do this actually with my flower containers here at home because I have several large urns. I will fill them a little bit in the bottom with plastic bottles for the drainage. And so I don't waste so much soil and they're not heavy. But one thing I found one year, I filled them too full with bottles and I didn't have enough growing medium, enough soil there to get good, healthy, strong roots. And so just making sure you don't have too many bottles in there would be key. There's another question from Teresa. It looks like she would like to know how to keep chipmunks out of containers.
There's a couple things that you could try. The first thing that comes to mind is like a small fence or something like a chicken wire that you can put over the top of it that they can't reach through. That's the first thing that kind of comes to mind. Other than that, I don't know if there's any pesticides or anything like that that would work in that situation or not. If somebody else wants to chime in, I'd be more than happy.
Yeah, so this is Amanda. The Natural Resources Center up at Purdue, the FNR department, they just put out this great video on this exact topic. And what they did was you take galvanized wire, basically, and you cut it to the size of your container and you put it then in your container. You can spray paint it black or brown to match the soil and then put a little bit of soil above it. So that way, you know, as those squirrels are coming in and they're trying to dig down, they're hitting that wire. It was really smart. So if you go over to their Facebook page, FNR Purdue Facebook page, I'll put it in the comments, but you can actually see the video of how they built them.
Okay, moving on. Kind of a little off topic, but at the same time on, Deb said that since we're talking cover crops, they planted crimson clover on recommendation from Soil and Water. It's blooming. Should we mow that and then work it into the soil?
Yeah, so red clover, it can be terminated a couple of ways. You can mow it, but you're likely going to have to do multiple passes. It won't kill it the first time. If you are able to use some cultivation, that would help too, but I understand if you are in a no-till garden situation. So mowing can be an option, but just be conscious of the fact that you might have to do it multiple times in order to effectively kill that cover crop.
Thanks, Amanda. I think the last question I see right now is Anita. She said, is there any good way to keep stink bugs away from the garden? They seem to attack the zucchini, straight necks, etc. This usually leads to death of the plant.
I would suggest, and we can send some more info out on this, and Amanda might be able to elaborate a little bit more, but Mathias talked a little bit about companion planting. And so a lot of different herbs and things like that, and I know marigolds are a big one, can really help. They help keep weeds down, but they also can repel some bugs naturally. And so we need to do a little bit of research on exactly what those options might be. I don't know if Amanda, you know exactly what those could be, but we can definitely send some resources out on companion planting too.
I would have to look into that.
So I don't think we're seeing any more questions pop up. So we just want to kind of wrap up and say thank you. We enjoy having everyone on here and having everyone learn a little bit each week. And so we're going to be sending the survey out, like we said, and we'll send all these resources out to you as well. And we will see you all next week.